Good afternoon, everyone. I am Rufio Iju Kim, the Program Officer at the PEMNA Secretariat. Thank you all for joining us today at the first TCOP webinar of the year. And in the previous TCOP webinar held under the topic of fixed asset management, valuation, and registries, we noticed that many of our members were interested in learning more about Korea's case. And accommodating the members' needs, we will be delving deeper into the Korea's public asset management at today's webinar. And we hope you make the most out of it. And one quick announcement before we get started. So as you may have noticed, we are using the interpretation feature in this Zoom webinar. And if you look at your screen, you'll see the globe looking interpretation channel button at the bottom of your screen. And please make sure you stay on the right channel of your preferred language throughout the webinar. And lastly, please make sure you stay muted while you're not speaking. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to Fabian then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rufio, for the introduction, and warm welcome indeed. It's great to have this session because indeed in November at the TCOP, we had a general overview of public asset management and a great presentation from Korea, which did trigger a lot of interest, going deeper in the different dimensions of public asset management, the policy dimension, the accounting dimension, valuation aspects, but also the information systems. And so really a great thank you to the secretariats, to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and all the great speakers today for giving us this opportunity to dive deeper in the issue and really have a knowledge exchange. Great to see the strong interest. We have more than 95 participants connected and a packed room in Hanoi. It's also great to see that people can get back together in the office. We're all longing this. And so without further ado, let me introduce Philly Sissoko. Many of whom may know him from previous PEMNA sessions and work. He's actually the World Bank Practice Manager for Governance, covering East Asia and the Pacific, and has been working on many of these topics in these countries. He's a chartered public accountant, So before working at the World Bank, he was working in the private sector as well. And before moving to Asia, where he worked for and led the program for almost 4 years now, Philly, he also worked in South Asia. So he has really a very rich knowledge and expertise in these aspects. So without further ado, looking forward to hear from you the opening remarks, and then I'll say a word about the program and the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabian. You may want to turn on your camera because we can't see you, Fabian. But it's great to join this TCOP meeting. And as you said, Fabian, really great to see so many countries connected, and that gradually, right, face-to-face meetings being, held in various countries, and to see the room back in Vietnam. Glad to really connect with all of you. Good afternoon. I'm assuming that we're all more or less in the same time zone. Maybe I saw someone connecting from Russia. Good morning to you. And thanks all of you to joining this webinar. It's really a great pleasure for me to deliver the opening remarks of this TCOP on a topic that is really close to my heart, which is asset management and balance sheet, and also to learn more about the Korean experience in optimizing the management of public assets. I would like to start first by, as all of you know, reiterating the importance of balance sheet information for decision-making and fiscal risk management. I'm sure many of you have seen the October 2018 IMF Fiscal Monitor. I know it's been a while, but if not, I would strongly encourage you to read again this Fiscal Monitor, what that focus on balance sheet information. I mean, one of the main messages of this Fiscal Monitor was that, balance sheet really provide the most comprehensive picture of public wealth. It brings together, all the accumulated assets and liabilities that the government controls, and then therefore present the entirety of what the state owns and owes, and a more comprehensive fiscal picture on which to base decision-making beyond debt and deficit. I would like in that regard to highlight that high quality and timely accrual-based financial reporting in the public sector can be achieved through the adoption of IPSAS standard. And on this, we're very pleased to know that many countries in the world and in the region are adopting accounting standards based on IPSAS. And one of the things that I was telling Fabian is that we'll be glad to invite the IPSAS board, if many of you think that this is relevant, to attend one of your sessions to address any questions that you may have in transitioning to IPSAS. We had a webinar internally at the bank with the IPSAS board, where they shared a project that I think would be really relevant for this region, a new project that they have on accounting for natural assets, which I think would be really relevant for many countries in the region. So on the overall, I'm really glad that the topic of this TCOP is on assets management, which, as you know, is often overlooked. And what I mean is non-financial assets, because as you know, financial assets are usually managed optimally. What is often overlooked is other non-financial assets, infrastructure, heritage, and natural assets. And though we don't really have a lot of global data on how much they represent in balance sheets, there are clear indications that these assets are large and have the potential to generate significant resources if managed optimally. For example, public houses can generate substantive resources if leases are based on market value, not historical value, which is often the case. Good public asset recording and management is also essential to support countries' climate adaptation and mitigation efforts. But as you will see, and as you all know, there are some challenges in accounting for assets, and I would just highlight a few of them. One is the recognition and measurement, especially heritage and natural assets, because proper evaluation of public assets that are dispersed across the public sector, and which with often outdated book entry evaluations remains an important challenge. Consolidation is also a major challenge in jurisdictions where there are subnational entities and public corporations, and all these needs to be consolidated in the financial statements. And the third challenge.
또 세 번째 도전 과제에 대해서 제가 말씀을 드리고 싶은 것은요, 물론 중요하다고 생각하고 가장 중요하다고 생각하는 법입니다만, 우리가 반드시 아주 좋은 그리고
통역사님
튼튼한.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think there was we were hearing interpreters in this channel. Yeah, please proceed. Sorry.
Okay. So I was actually just wrapping up to say that the Korean experience that will be showcased today is a great example of how these challenges can be addressed to improve the management of assets. And we're very pleased and like to thank the Korean government for sharing its experience in assets management, from the legal, the regulatory framework, the institutional arrangement, and what I referred to earlier, the information system, right? That can really help ensure a consistent and sustainable approach across the government. So it's really a unique opportunity to dive into more details on the how-to and operational understanding, which can inform national reforms. So let me close by thanking the TCOP Secretariat for organizing this webinar, the Korean government and all participants, and we're very pleased to join you during this discussion. And we'll be glad to also organize a follow-up technical session with the IPSAS board to address any specific technical questions that you may have on the accounting standards. Let me close there and hand over to you, Fabian, or the PEMNA Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Philly. And indeed, a great lineup of speakers today. But just before we go there, we'll have our traditional TCOP picture. So if you want to be in the picture, please turn on your cameras. If not, please display your most beautiful virtual background so that we can take a family picture. And I think when Rufio prompts us, let's just say TCOP. I think it makes for a better
Yes.
smile than PAM.
I like the idea. So yeah, let's take a quick screenshot image of our today's webinar. So for those who can, think. And what we usually do is we wave hand to each other, so we can wave hand. All right, I think they will do. And teacup. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Great, thanks, Rufio. So in today's session, we'll have great presentations really across the Korean experience. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ho-Shil Kang, who's the leader of government property research team at the Korean Asset Management Corporation, an accomplished lawyer with great expertise in the legal and regulatory framework of public asset management. He'll present the evolution of to current policy and objective in terms of asset management, and also explain a bit the institutionalization, the institutional framework on how that's being organized, who is responsible for what. And I think that's a question we often receive, is that asset management is really very decentralized across the public sector, central government, local governments, agencies and SOEs. And so that would be a great opportunity to look in more details at this current experience. Then we'll have a presentation by Mrs. So Young Han, government accounting team leader from the Government Accounting and Financial Statistics Center at the Korean Institute of Public Finance. So Ms. Han is a CPA and has been very much involved in the national policies and standards of accounting in Korea, and also for the last 15 years, and also has a wealth of expertise in terms of valuation of assets, physical assets, the recognition, the depreciation. And so it would be very interesting to hear from her how this has been evolved. And also the discrepancies between IPSAS and the Korean asset so accounting standards and practices. And then we'll have a presentation by Mr. Sang-Wook Nam, a senior manager of the Korean Public Finance Information Service, expert in digital transformation and in financial management information system, dBrain. I think many of you are very familiar with dBrain, and many are certainly familiar with Mr. Nam, as he's also in charge of international cooperation and has actually worked across the globe with many countries, including in PEMNA. And so we'll be very pleased to hear from him how actually this information is being collected, managed, and integrated with the other aspects of the public financial management information system through dBrain, so from the asset registry to the reporting. And so that this really will give us a very comprehensive knowledge exchange, looking at the policy, the regulatory framework, legal framework, the institutional setup, the accounting and valuation aspects, as well as the information systems that you need to underpin that, many of which are very relevant for ongoing reforms in PEMNA countries. So we will also have a significant Q&A session between 30-40 minutes, so be able to really answer all your questions. So please do prepare your questions. You can post them in the chat, your comments. It would be also great to hear from the PEMNA members how this experience connects with their own reform. I know there are quite a lot of reforms ongoing. I think the Philippines has just issued its first ever national public asset management plan, so congratulations. And so I guess that many of today's experience will be useful for the implementation of these policies and laws. So without further ado, let me invite Mr. Ho-Shil Kang to give his presentation. Mr. Khan, if you can project your PowerPoint, that would be great. I'm also seeing that Timor-Leste has joined us. That's great. Welcome, Timor-Leste.
Let me talk to the interpreters, because I don't think we are.
That's true. There's no sound on the English channel.
No. Just give me a few seconds. I'm talking to the interpreters. So it looks like we're not getting the audio from the presenter, Mr. Ho-Chil Kang. Mr. Ho-Chil Kang, I know you're in the Korean channel. Are you currently presenting? Because we cannot hear you. Actually, let me make a phone call to see what's going on. Just give us a sec.
Thank you. If you can hear us, if there are audio issues, you can just connect with your iPhone. So having two channels, one for the presentation and then the phone for the audio. It's actually what I'm doing.
안 돼? 지금은 다시 한번. 들어옵니까? 그럼 처음부터 다시 할까요? 예, 처음부터 다시 할게요.
So shall I begin from the beginning, right from the beginning? So we'll go back to the beginning.
안녕하십니까? 오늘 캠코를 대표하여
Hello, representing CAMCO today, I will make a presentation on introducing the methods of government property management. I'm Kang Ho-Chil. I'm a team head at the CAMCO Institute. I'm happy and honored to be able to make a presentation on government property before PEMNA member countries and relevant Korean organizations. First of all, let me introduce my team. To my right is Dr. Bae Sung-yeol. To my left is Manager Lee Jin-woo and intern Lee Rim seated next to him. So let me start with the introduction of CAMCO. The theme given to me today is Introduction of Government Property Management and Asset Evaluation and Reporting. CAMCO was established as a public company to carry out public functions in the household, corporate, and public sectors, and we were established in 1962. Our organization is composed of 5 headquarters and 12 regional headquarters, and the total headcount is 1,785. Please refer to the handout for more details on what we do. The single law applicable to government property management is the State Property Act. The State Property Act was established a long time ago in 1950. And legislative examples of enacting and operating State Property Act can be found in France, Japan, and Korea. As delegated by law for specific enforcement of the law, Ministry of Economy and Finance enacts and distributes guidelines and business process standards to relevant organizations. Next, I'll talk about the government's government policy, property policies. When it comes to the macroscopic policy changes, it took place over the years, beginning with the management centered on disposal, which was in place until 1976. From 1976 to 1993, government switched to passive management centered on maintenance and preservation. From 2010 and onwards, to active management centered on the management centered on expansion and utilization. In contrast, since 2011, the government has taken an integrated management approach centering on the role of the Office of Administration. The Constitution and the State Property Act require the government to compile an annual comprehensive report. This is a plan that includes the government's property plan for the following year. Now, I'd like to talk about the relevant management organizations, what their roles are, and how they collaborate. The Ministry of Economy and Finance oversees, directs, and supervises all state-owned property management agencies. Each ministry or department manages government property that belong to a special account or fund and manages administrative property belonging to the general account under the delegation by the Ministry of Economy and Finance. The Public Procurement Service, or PPS, is delegated by MOEF to perform general administrative affairs, and the CAMCO is entrusted by MOEF to manage general property of the government. The central government also delegates part of its government property management affairs to local governments. When leasing, selling, and exchanging government properties, local governments receive the various benefits which they use to better perform local administration.
PEMCO's employees in charge of state-owned property management receive training on all relevant laws and regulations and specialized training for each specific task. Also, as a state-owned property management agency, PEMCO provides education on state-owned properties for public officials in charge of state-owned properties in central government offices and local governments. Now, let me explain the valuation of state-owned property. The valuation of state-owned property can be divided into valuation for accounting and valuation for transaction. The former is a value entered in the accounting books and is used for various statistics and internal reports, while the latter is a value or amount used for transactions such as leasing or selling state-owned property, which is of public interest. Next presenter from the KIPF will explain the valuation of state-owned property for accounting purpose, and I would like to explain the valuation of government properties for transaction purpose. The valuation is divided into two: valuation by published price and appraisal. The published price is the price per unit area of land annually announced by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport and local governments after conducting a survey and evaluation of all lands and buildings across the country in order to fulfill the purpose prescribed by relevant laws such as taxation. The government calculates the rent for state-owned properties by multiplying these published prices by the rates for each rental type. As shown in the figure, the rent for state-owned property is calculated electronically. Appraisal is an expert's estimation of the market price of the property. When the government sells state property, the government commissions the appraisal to an expert to calculate the sale price. The figure in the slide is an example of an expert's report made to the government on an appraisal of a state-owned property, which is for sale. The revenue generated by a government property management agency cannot be directly expended for its expenses, but must be paid in full to the government general accounts, and then a separate budget shall be allocated to cover the expenses. However, as an exception, KEMCO can directly spend the rent revenue among the revenue generated from state property to cover its expenses. There also are systems that promote the efficient management of state-owned property, such as having lessee or tenant repair old buildings and reducing their rent instead. In the case of KEMCO, if the ratio or the percentage of rental income against the total revenue from state property management gets higher, KEMCO gets higher performance evaluation from the Ministry of Economy and Finance. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Oshil Khan, for this very rich presentation. So we are absorbing, and I hope that member will prepare their questions, which we can then discuss. Very interesting to see both the evolution of the policy objectives, from initially revenue generation through the sale of assets, through then to the optimization, and then through now revenue optimization through basically the utilization of assets and expansion of assets. And so that's something which we'll be very happy to discuss further. But before that, let me hand over to Mrs. So-Young Han for her presentation on the accounting perspective and valuation perspective of assets, focusing mainly on physical assets, but also natural assets, as Philly mentioned. Thank you.
네, 안녕하십니까? 한국조세재정연구원 국가회계조사.
Hello, I'm Han So-young and the Government Accounting Team Head of the KIPF, Government Accounting and Financial Statistics Center. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to present at this PEMNA TCOP seminar held on the theme of the Korea's public asset management. I'd like to make an introduction of our team members. Oh Hae-jung, who is a CPA, Choi-eun, and the researcher that has come together for this project. And I'd like to now walk you through the PowerPoint slides I prepared. This presentation will cover how Korea follows the accrual accounting principles to recognize the government assets, especially PPE infrastructure assets and heritage assets in government financial statements, and what criteria will apply for initial measurement and subsequent evaluation. I will give you a brief introduction of the Government Accounting and Financial Statistics Center and the accrual accounting principles of the Korean government, and explain in detail the recognition status of government assets and financial assets statements and the criteria for asset measurement and evaluation. For better understanding, I will briefly compare IPSAS against our government accounting standards to highlight the differences. And firstly, I'd like to talk about the Government Accounting and Financial Statistics Center. The center was established in line with the government's introduction to accrual accounting to strengthen public finance management, and the year of establishment is 2010. The center's main tasks include the public sector accounting standards, setting the standards, conducting research and analysis on the accrual accounting system, supporting the preparation of combined financial statement to the government financial statistics, and providing education to strengthen accounting capabilities of the attendees. The center's main tasks are entrusted under the law, Article 11 of the National Accounting Act, by the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and they are carried out based on the expertise of our center. Our organization largely consists of accounting team that enacts then amends standards, and financial reporting education team that supports the preparing CFS for the central government to offer education, and financial statistics team that supports preparing financial statistics and the CFS for public institutions. There are 30 people working for these organizations. And now on the central government accounting standards, in particular, The central government accounting standards form the basis for preparing the central government's financial reports and is dictated by law. And they're composed of enforcement rules on the central government accounting standards, a MOEF decree, and 22 other detailed regulations and orders. And today we will deal with the standards for the PPE and infrastructure. Unless otherwise especially prescribed, the central government accounting standards follow generally accepted accounting principles and accounting conventions that are generally regarded as fair and appropriate. Regarding economic transactions resulting from the financial activities, the standards are used for accounting on a accrual basis with double and triple bookkeeping. Moreover, we also refer to IPSAS in an effort to minimize difference and enhance consistency. And continuous efforts are made towards this end. And the accounting standards are enacted and amended by the Deliberation Committee of the Government Accounting System, and the due process is as follows. Please refer to the handout. Now I'll talk about the recognition status of the assets on the government financial statements. In the statement of financial position, the government's assets are disaggregated into current assets, investments, general PPE, infrastructure assets, intangible assets, and other non-current assets. Today, I will focus on the PPE, and Korea's total assets stand at 2,487 trillion won in fiscal year 2020. Of these, general PPE accounts for 604 trillion and infrastructure assets 348 trillion won. The general PPE are assets that are acquired for use in entities' unique administrative activities for more than 1 year. They include land, buildings, infrastructures, machinery, furniture, fixtures, office equipment, and so on. And the infrastructure assets are capital assets that are invested for large scale to form a foundation of the country, and they have economic benefits that arise over considerable periods. They are like a network. They operate within a network. They include roads, railroads, and harbors and dams. And infrastructures only include those owned and effectively controlled by the government to suit the purposes of the central government financial report. And they exclude electricity, local roads, and sewage owned by public institutions or local governments. Korea introduced accrual accounting in 2011, and the slide shows the changes in general PPE and infrastructure assets from 2011 to 2019. General PPE and infrastructure are continuously increasing, and land make up the largest share of general PPE with more than 60%, followed by military assets and buildings. More than half of the infrastructure assets is taken up by roads, and they divide into national roads and local roads. For more information, please refer to the central government's financial report posted at the Open Fiscal Data website. And this is a detailed classification of the general PPE. You will see land, the buildings, the structures. These are some of the breakdowns within the general PPE. And we manage the subcategories closely. And unlike general PPE, infrastructure assets are classified as a type and not by form. The government discloses infrastructure assets in 8 types, including roads. This chapter deals with the measurement of government property, and I'll explain the measurement criteria under accounting standards that are applied when preparing financial statements. Measurement criteria are also determined by the type and kind of asset. If you look at the chart of accounts, you can see that in the general PPE items are subdivided into several subcategories of a detailed management approach. And here, infrastructure assets are divided into 8 types, and we have land, buildings, structures, and others as subcategories to manage the information details.
Now I'd like to talk about the values of general tangible assets and social infrastructure assets shown in the statement of financial position are recorded based on their acquisition cost. I think it is the point that you take great interest in. However, if assets are acquired by means of acquisition of no-owner property, exchanged with a counterparty other than the state or land donation, their fair value at the time of acquisition shall be their acquisition cost. For general tangible assets, the acquisition cost is determined by adding incidental expenses to the construction cost or purchase price of the asset. Korea stipulates the revaluation of tangible assets as an accounting policy, and in accordance with the regulations, general tangible assets and infrastructure subject to revaluation must be revalued at their fair value. However, if there is no reasonable evidence of the fair value, the published price of an institution with public credibility or the amortized replacement cost method can be used for revaluation. The price required for reproduction or reacquisition as of the revaluation date is subtracted from the accumulated depreciation and accumulated depreciation losses over the elapsed years. That is the amortized replacement cost method. And since it is often difficult to ascertain the fair value, the details of alternative valuation methods for each asset type are stipulated as follows. Intangible assets shall be measured at the acquisition cost by adding incidental expenses to the development cost or purchase price of the asset. I believe that you must take interest in the accounting recognition of intangible assets. As I've mentioned before, intangible assets shall be measured at the acquisition cost by adding incidental expenses to the development cost. Securities are classified into equity securities and debt securities according to their type. Debt securities are evaluated at their acquisition cost after amortization, and equity securities shall be evaluated by adding incidental cost to the purchase price and applying the weighted average method for each stock item, which shall be the acquisition cost. However, in the case of the securities held for investment purpose of trading profit, they shall be evaluated at the fair value if there is any way to identify their fair value. For the valuation method of other assets, please refer to the following table. Next, I'd like to talk about the property item of heritage assets. They are defined as the assets with significant historical, natural, cultural, educational, and artistic value that the government should preserve indefinitely for the present and future generations. Heritage assets are not recognized as assets, but information pertaining to these assets, such as their types and current status, are disclosed as the mandatory supplementary information. For your understanding, mandatory supplementary information is information that is not included in the financial statements, unlike the notes, but is provided as supplementary information for understanding the financial statements. Costs related to acquisition of heritage assets shall be recognized as acquisition cost of heritage assets, and the costs related to the maintenance of the acquired heritage assets shall be recognized as maintenance costs for heritage assets. General tangible assets and infrastructure assets shall be depreciated by applying the straight line method, etc., over a period estimated by an objective and reasonable method. However, land, standing timber, depreciation, replaced infrastructure, and assets under construction are not subject to depreciation. The range of useful life of each property disclosed in the actual national financial statements is as follows. Last but not least, I'd like to talk about the summary of differences in asset valuation regulations between IPSAS and Korea's national accounting standards. I would like to mention a few of the important differences before I wrap up. First, recognition of heritage assets. The IPSAS regards heritage assets as one of tangible assets and allows their recognition as assets when all the requirements are met, whereas Korea's national accounting standards stipulate that they cannot be recognized as assets. Also, in the revaluation regulations, IPSAS allows the choice between revaluation model and cost model, whereas Korea's national accounting standards require uniform application of revaluation model without applying it to intangible assets. In the case of public-private investment projects, when management and operation rights are provided to private operators, They are presented as a deduction of assets in the Korean national accounting. So the total assets are recognized in the accounting book as net assets. However, they are recognized as forward income or liabilities in the IPSAS. In addition, there is no separate regulation on investment property in Korea's national accounting, which is different from IPSAS. CAMCO came up with a presentation on how the rent from the government property is recognized and managed in the national accounting system. Last, infrastructure assets with the depreciation cost replaced. Depreciation costs can be replaced with the cost of management and maintenance without depreciating infrastructure assets, such as facilities, as long as they maintain the same service potential as the time of acquisition due to management and maintenance efforts. However, this exception regulation is limited to the cases where it is objectively proven that the service potential of infrastructure assets are maintained at the same level as at the time of acquisition through an efficient infrastructure management system, such as some road pavements cases managed by the road pavement system. So as I mentioned before, this exceptional regulation is limited to specific cases such as road pavement. This concludes my presentation, and I would like to express my gratitude to the participants for your undivided attention to my rather complex presentation. If you need further explanation or have any question, I am happy to answer in the Q&A session. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mrs. Soyoung-han, for this very rich presentation. It's very detailed, very impressive, and I'm sure we'll have more questions. But before that, let me hand over to Mr. Sang-wook Nam to see how the information systems actually make all that possible, to register, record, report on these assets, and to optimize the management. And Mr. Nam, I see that your presentation is also very dense and rich. So please explain in detail the slides so that the interpreters can actually translate this very complex topic. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for introducing me, Fabia. Actually, I'm speaking in English, no worry about the translation. Okay, before I start my presentation, I will introduce my team members. Because of social distancing measures, our team members is participating in their own or her desk. So there is Sukhyun Shin, Senior Manager from Asset System Operation Division, and Mr. Hee-kyung Ma, Manager of the Asset System Operation Division. And also there are two other members, Mr. Sang Yoo, Researcher, External Cooperation Division, and the other the participants is Ms. Hanul Oh, Associate from the External Cooperation Division. By the way, I'm Paul Lam from Korea Public Finance Information Service, or KPFIS. Now I will begin my presentation. Can you see my slide? Maybe you can, right? And can you hear my voice? All right. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that everybody here stays safe until the COVID-19 pandemic is terminated. It gives me a great pleasure to meet all of you here in 2022 PEMNA TCOP webinar focusing on the Korea's public asset management. What I'm going to present today is to share our experience on national property management system through dBrain Plus in Korea. From now on, let me start on my slide. My presentation will be following this order. The first, I briefly explain who we are and what we do under the name of Korea Public Finance Information Service. Then I will present the main concept of my topic, that is how to deal with national property using dBrain system over Korea Financial Management Information System. Okay, let's begin with KPFIS overview. KPFIS was established with the passing of the Korea Public Finance Information Service Act by the National Assembly in 2016. So as you can see from Korea FMIS history, Korea FMIS or dBrain system had been outsourced to private sector since 2007. Through the time, the need to ascertain security and stability of such an important system that serves as a backbone of FMIS was raised. So as a result, KPFIS was established in 2016 with one of the public institutions under the Ministry of Economic Finance of Korea. So if I explain the histories of the Korea FMIS a little bit more, currently we are using the first generation of Korea FMIS that is called dBrain Plus since January this year. It's just operational just in this year. So one of the main features for the dBrain Plus system is to incorporate them with the state-of-the-art IT technologies such as artificial intelligence and big data. Now, let me move on to the purpose and the roles of KPFIS. As stated in Article 1 of KPFIS Act, the purpose of our organization is to improve Korea's public finance management and contribute toward the development of fiscal information management system in the international community. With this at the foundation, the key functions of the KPFIS are: the first, improving efficiency of public finance management via operation and management of dBrain Plus. Second, supporting fiscal policy making and execution through management of fiscal statistics. Third, facilitating international cooperation for international informatization of public finance management. Last, operating and managing cybersecurity center for public finance sector. As for the international cooperation networks, we are closely working side by side with the international organizations such as World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, International Monetary Fund, as well as the PEMNA, in the field of knowledge sharing programs, capacity programs, and technical assistance, IT consulting on FMIS field, and so on. So you are now looking at some of the pictures taken from the international cooperation activities from our institution. Okay, from now on, I'll present how the dBrain Plus deal with the national property in Korea. As the moderator Fabian explained, this presentation is a follow-up seminar for the PEMNA COP webinar held on November last year, titled Government Properties, Valuation and Reporting. There are a bunch of subsequent questions in line with the Korea Asset or Property Management Information System. So when I prepared this following slide, I have tried to address those questions into them as much as possible. This slide shows the system configuration of the dBrain Plus. As you can see in the slide, the dBrain Plus is composed of several server systems, which are the Central Financial Management Information System and User Support System, Statistic Analysis System, and Open Fiscal Data, and so on. Each subsystem has different modules respectively. National property, the one I'm going to focus on today, it's a kind of one of the module, or we call National Property Management Information System. that is included in the red box, as you can see in the slide, is one of the modules under the Central Financial Management Information System of dBrain Plus. As you may guess, National Property Management Information System is not separate information system from the dBrain Plus, but integrated information system as part of the dBrain Plus. Let's look into the inside what's National Property Information System in the next slide. Now you are looking at the system configuration of the National Property Module or National Property Management Information System as part of the dBrain Plus. National Property Management Information System consists of National Property Comprehensive Plan, property life cycle management from the acquisition, conversion up to disposal, and price evaluation and closing. So when we had PEMNA seminar in November last year, there's an 이나라 재산. You have heard of that. 이나라 재산 that consists of mobile online support, investigation management, GIS, and price service portal were being operated separately from the dBrain, but now 이나라 재산 becomes part of the dBrain Plus since January this year. As per national property task in Korea, it starts with the establishment of a national property comprehensive plan. This is made in the previous year, and property acquisition, property disposal, etc. is executed according to this plan in the following year. National property price evaluation task is to evaluate the current and appropriate asset value according to the guideline. At the end of the year, national property closing task is processed after making the national property management and operation report for the year and submitting them to the National Assembly. In the national property ledger management, one integrated information system, that is National Property Management Information System, is being operated, covering 8 types of assets for national property valuation, management, and reporting functions. As for the external interconnection, there is several linkages from institutions such as Public Procurement Service, ChemCo, and many line ministries that are maintaining their own asset ledgers separately. When we talk about GIS, Graphic Information System, function from the National Property Management Information System, it enables the users to locate national property via various maps. So I'll explain the GIS map functions of the dBrain Plus in the later slide. This slide shows the land type ledger screen and its data elements encoded and managed in the dBrain Plus. The data elements are basic information of land, such as asset type, asset classification, area, and price, and specific information of land, such as land category and actual use, etc. This screen on the right, this one you are looking at, is a dBrain Plus land ledger user screen for managing land as national property in more details. As for the land location, this is mandatory field, and this land location is mapped into coordinates of maps which will be used for indicating land location in the various maps. I'll explain a GIS function in the later the slide. This slide shows the building type ledger screen and its data elements encoded and managed in the dBrain Plus. The data elements are basic information of building, such as asset type, asset classifications, area, and price, and specific information of building, such as building structure, roof type, and actual use, etc. The screen here is the dBrain Plus building ledger user screen for managing land as national property in more details. As for the building location as well, this is also mandatory field, and this building location is also mapped into coordinates of maps, which will be used for indicating a building location in the various map in the GIS. Moving on to the external linkages of National Property Management Information System, the dBrain Plus integrates and manages land and building information by linking major information from near estate agencies in Korea. As for the external linkages, there are two categories. One is for National Property Ledger Information Interfaces. The other is for near estate and geographic information interfaces. The first, National Property Ledger Information Interfaces occur in real time from independent national property information in ChemCo and Ministry of Education and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. National Property Management Information System in the dBrain Plus manages all the line ministries' national property as a whole. Second, National Property Management Information System in the dBrain Plus manages real estate related information that is interfaced from external specialized institutions. For example, land ledger, building ledger information from Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport is transferred to the dBrain Plus on a weekly basis in order to inform asset manager of the changes of area and owner information and so on. Also, cadastral map information and spatial information of major facilities such as buildings and roads is updated via linkage with the external institutions. Aerial photos and 3D map information and even satellite photos are interfaced into dBrain Plus for GIS service, which I will explain in the next section. Okay, in this slide, so we are going to explore the GIS maps in details. So as I explained in the previous slide, National Property Management Information System provides dBrain Plus users with a geographic information system service. This slide shows the result of Sejong government compound search that is indicated in the red color from the basic menu option. This slide shows the result of location search by lot number. In the GIS map, in the middle, the purple color here you are looking at right now is a section of a lot from the location search. So also, it provides GIS users with the measuring functions of distance in the map by clicking 2 points from this point to the end points. The red line you are looking at in the map with the result of distance measurement that is 0.25 kilometer long. This is very useful functions for users. This slide shows the result of Sejong government compound search that is indicated in the red color from the aerial satellite photo menu option. Okay, the slide shows the result of Sejong government compound search that is indicated in red color from the 3D map using latest spatial information technology. Okay, we've come to the end of presentation on National Property Management Information System through dBrain Plus in Korea. So I hope that this was informative and helpful for all the listeners. And now the floor is open to questions. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nam, for this excellent and very rich presentation, and great to see that there has been quite a lot of change since last year, since you now launched dBrain Plus, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions on that as well. Let me maybe open the floor to the different TCOP members. I see that some have already posted their question from Cambodia. So kind of Hang, if you want maybe to read out your question. And then we have quite a few questions also from Vietnam. But let me first turn to Cambodia. Thank you.
Good afternoon from Cambodia. Excuse me, do you hear me? Sorry. Oh, okay. So
very well.
Thank you for the webinar today and for the presenter. And frankly, I have a few questions as I post in the chat box. And currently, we are just doing some reform in Cambodia, and we just want to explore more better practice like Korea. And I just want to know about your basis of budgeting, financial budgeting, or either you are on cash basis or on accrual basis when you prepare your annual budgeting. So in case you prepare on case basis, and then your general accounting or some sort like you capitalize PPE or the other infrastructure asset, and I just want to know how do you amortize or depreciate such asset, and how the impact of such depreciation on your budget preparation. That is just my question on the first part, and I just want to know that, and if you can just share what is your practice, then it would be very helpful for us. Thank you.
안녕하십니까. 국가회계재정통계센터 한소영 팀장입니다. 저희가 답변을 드리는
My
게
name is Han So-young, and I think it would be more appropriate that I respond to your question. When it comes to budgeting, we are cash-based, and that means when it comes to PP&E, when we reflect that in the budget, it's part of the expenditure, and the accrual, the accounting principles such as amortization, depreciation does not occur. And also when it comes to the chat box, some of the questions I received from the chat box is when it comes to the accounting for the budgeting and the book closing, there are two different things. For the budgeting, we go for a cash-based approach, so we'll be very specific with that. When it comes to closing, settlement, do we look at the income and expenditures, and we do a cash-based closing first, and then we come up with financial statements based on the accrual accounting. So we do another the financial closing of the books. We do it 2 times. When it comes to executing a budget, do we have the capitalized at all times, all PPEs? When it comes to small assets, less than 500,000 Korean won, we regard that as expenditure. But if an asset is less than 500,000 won, it's really cannot be regarded as a meaningful asset. So that's why we apply such rules. So for most of the assets, we do capitalize. So that's what I can tell you as a response. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Vietnam, who also had a few questions on these presentations. And it would also be great to hear from the Philippines and Indonesia.
Trước hết là cảm ơn cái bài trình bày của các cái diễn giả từ phía.
I would like to thank the presentation. From the perspective of the Public Asset Management Department of the MOF of Vietnam, we highly appreciate the three presentations in which we heard many interesting information and useful information. And we are interested in these relating to the management of public assets, relating to the government financial statements. Actually, we have many questions to ask, but I think that there are a lot of technical questions. So I don't think that we cannot raise all the questions in this webinar. But I hope that we will have some other occasions where we can, discuss in more detail of the experience of South Korea and other countries. So that we can refer to and apply in the context of Vietnam. So allow me to raise some questions. The first one is that in terms of the asset property management of the government of Vietnam. So you seem to go through stages. The first stage is in 2076. You seem to focus on liquidation of the property. In the next periods, you didn't mention this anymore. What about the real estate? The real estate disposal. So in the next stage, how do you manage the national properties? Do you still dispose these assets, or do you did you stop to dispose it and they just try to use the assets? Because in Vietnam, we are considering between whether to retain the assets or to dispose some of the real estate properties of the state. My second question is about.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me just pause you. I just see a message that the Korean interpreters cannot hear you now. So let me just double check.
They have to turn off the interpretation functions and use the English channel.
Okay, so please use English channel for the Korean interpretation. Okay, try to speak if that works now.
Đợi tí để ra nó điều chỉnh lại cho mấy ông này.
Is that okay? So do the Korean interpreter now here? So please try to speak again now.
Can I repeat the questions? The first question is that you have 4 stages of property management policies. The first stage started in 1676. You seem to center on the disposals of government's properties, but you didn't mention that in the later stages. So can you please explain, whether you continue to dispose properties of the government? Because in Vietnam, we are considering whether we should dispose real estate properties of the state or to preserve and use it for other purposes. Over.
Great, thank you very much for all these good questions. I think many are directed to you, Mrs. Han. I don't know if you heard the interpretation. I think the questions are also posted in the chat box.
Hi, Fabian. So it seems like the questions from Vietnam official didn't go through the interpretation channel, the Korean interpreters. So we're trying to figure out. I think the channels might have got mixed up a little bit. Just give us a few seconds.
Thank you. In the meantime, the
혹시
comments are also
채팅창에
written in the chat
있는
box.
질문을 중심으로 먼저 설명을 드려도 괜찮을까요? 이게 정리되시는 시간 동안 그
May I
채팅창
answer some of the questions raised in the chat box? So I can actually check the questions from the Vietnamese participants in the chat box. Can I answer those questions first before we are waiting?
네,
Please, thank you.
첫 번째 질문이 그
The first question is about the CFS,
작성하기 전에 공공자산을 재평가하느냐 이런 질문.
whether revaluation of government property is conducted for the CFS. As I've mentioned before, the revaluation is required according to the Korean National Accounting Standards. So the fair value is utilized for revaluation. And before the CFS is conducted or created, then revaluation is conducted
그리고 이제 저희 발표 자료 중에
and recorded on the national accounting, and also other infrastructure item. The question is, what are included in this other infrastructure assets? There are other social infrastructure other than 18 social infrastructure.
9년에 발생지 회계 제도를 최초로 도입하면서
Back in 2009, we adopted accrual accounting system for the national accounting system. And when we adopted the new system, we conducted a survey on the entire the social infrastructure status across the country. And we defined and identified all social infrastructure, and we categorized the social infrastructure of Korea into 8 categories. And the key social infrastructure could be occur other than those 8 categories. That's why we set up the financial the item of other social infrastructure. However, there is no specific social infrastructure which belongs to that other social infrastructure as of today. And the heritage assets are recognized as intangible assets here in Korea. And also when it comes to the river or waterway, there was a question how these social infrastructure related to river or riverbed is treated or recognized in the Korean national accounting. We've identified and defined the banks or the dams as social infrastructure related to river, and we do not have any difficulty in recognizing these river-related social infrastructure as the government property. However, the land under the river is also recognized as a government property, and that is why we measure and evaluate the land under the river. So the land under the river is evaluated at fair value or at a published price. So the published price for the land under the river is insignificant or extremely small. So the over-evaluation issue is resolved with the use of published price. And I've answered to the questions raised in the chat box. And when the interpretation issue is resolved, I can answer to more questions.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a follow-up question. So if I understand you correctly, you're evaluating the infrastructure around the river, not the water itself, right? So or are you also evaluating the natural resources themselves, and for instance, the exclusive economic zones on the seashores? I mean, that's one aspect. Then there was a question also, which I found quite interesting, is your innovation, and it's a small diversion from IPSAS, regarding infrastructure, focusing really on the service, the level of service, and actually compensating the maintenance investments and expenses with the depreciation. So I think that's quite interesting, as many of the asset management plans now tend to focus on level of service optimization. So if you can maybe expand a bit on that, and also specify what thresholds do you use for accounting purposes and classification purposes of maintenance expenditures to differentiate between expenses versus capital expenditures, which leads to an increase in valuation. Thank you.
네, 그 사회 기반 시설 관련한 그
Going back to the infrastructure, you're very much interested in how we do for the assessment for the maintenance. It has to do with the general accounting principles. We apply the general principles regarding the revenue, and for the capital expenditures, there are certain requirements, such as the use of life need to be extended, and the efficiencies need to be extremely improved. And then we can regard it as a capital expenditures and have the depreciation amortization go on. And for the replacement related assets, the use of life need to be expanded, and this does not have to do with the improving, but when we believe that certain level needs to be maintained with the maintenance, and when the use of life is kept because of the maintenance work, then if we make sure that the level B is maintained, it's not recorded as the capital expenditure, but as a simple expenditure. If we reflect both ways, such as the depreciation plus the maintenance cost, this is going to be the double the reflections, and therefore we take the rules from the Americas, such as the California government. When it comes to social infrastructure, this is the California state government is well known to have a lot of road as assets. So we reflect the experience of the California government, and we looked at overseas cases, and we also had the deliberation committee that looks into this matter. And the deliberation committee has recognized our proposal, so we now reflect that.
Thank you very much for your response. But let me, sorry. So let me see if any other colleagues want to come in orally or through the chat box. I think I see quite a few other questions in the chat box.
Okay, I can answer some of the questions from the chatting box.
Please,
okay, there is two questions I can explain. The first question raised by you regarding the asset national property comprehensive plan. Actually, while I'm presenting, I have explained a little bit, but to supplement some with regarding property national property comprehensive plan, it's like this. Okay, in the previous year, that means that the target year minus on the Ministry of Economic Finance post the guideline to each line ministries about how to make this annual plan, and then according to the guideline, each line ministry makes the plan, including there are certain categories like acquisition category and disposal category and develop category, and the last category is risk and indemnity categories. Based on those categories, each line ministry makes the following year's plan. That those the plans will be merged into one as a government annual comprehensive plan for national asset. Based on the national property comprehensive plan, each line ministry execute the budget according to the plan, and then at the end of the year, the government will produce the report, the differences between the national property comprehensive plan and also the actual one, and then this report will be delivered to the National Assembly for review. So that's how it goes. And also there's other questions from I think Vietnamese the listeners. Okay, let me read out the questions.
No, indeed, there's the question from the Department of Public Asset Management in Vietnam. One question about the 4 periods of public asset management in Korea, and the first period, which is about selling public land, so basically for financial reasons. And then so the question was this an objective also in the further periods, which I saw the second period was more management of assets, then it was optimization of revenue. So I guess the question is, to what extent are you still selling and disposing of assets to meet some of your financial targets, or is that actually not anymore an objective, since you mentioned expansion of assets rather? So I guess the question is also what you mean by expansion of assets as a policy objective. So if you want to...
Trong cái giai đoạn 2, 3, 4 thì có tiếp tục là bán đất công không? Hay là
do you still want to sell?
Hi, Nam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, would you be able to speak on a Vietnamese channel? I think our Korean interpreter is having difficulty because you're currently speaking in the English channel. This is my understanding.
No, I'm translating the question from Vietnam.
Yes, currently in the English channel, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, please proceed, and yes, let's proceed.
The interpreter have to log in as a guest and use the English channel to listen to English.
Exactly.
They cannot use this.
Yes.
Yes, let me talk to them. Please proceed.
hỏi lại cái câu vừa rồi thì
I just would like to repeat the question.
Cái câu hỏi thứ hai ấy là
The second question is about the financial statements.
dBrain thì nó có
and the dBrain, how does it link together? Because in Vietnam, we are using information from public asset registries for the preparation of financial statements. So my question is whether the system to prepare financial statements
cái giá trị tài
is the
sản
same or linked to the dBrain. The third question is that in the values of infrastructure assets, do you include the value of lands in, or lands values are accounted for differently? Over.
So who wishes to take these questions? Mrs. Han or Mr. Nam? As there are also quite a few questions on dBrain after.
Hi, Fabian, may I interrupt? May I jump in? So I
Yes.
just talked to our interpreters in Korea, and we've been told that it requires a relaying machine, a device, for them to be able to hear the questions from Vietnam. Some technical issues there. So I think what we can do is, I think we'll need to have the Vietnam type their questions in the chat box, so that I think that this seems like the only option we have.
Okay, but let's maybe see if there's other members of the panel who already want to respond to some of the questions which they've heard. And else indeed, for going forward, maybe Vietnam can type in.
Yes.
Và bạn Nga đã gõ máy lên đấy, chỉ còn có một câu hỏi sẽ đang gõ tiếp thôi. Còn trên bảng chat có mấy câu rồi.
So the questions are typed in the chat box already. We have one more to go.
Great.
네, 국가회계팀 한소영입니다. 베트남에서 주신 질문이 정부 자산을 이제 표시할 때 공기업 자산이나 기타 이런 유닛이 필요하냐, 포괄되냐 이런 질문을 주신 것 같은데요. 현재 국가통합재무제표, 국가중앙정부 재무제표에는 그 예산으로 운영되는 회계실체, 일반 회계와 기금 등이 포함이 되고요.
Yeah, now it's us who are not hearing the interpreters. Sorry. Rufio, if you think it takes some time to.
Oh yeah. So, so could you repeat your answer once again? Response from KIPF.
네, 다시 말씀드리겠습니다. 잘 통역되고 있나요?
Interpreters from Korea, can you come in? We still cannot hear you.
네.
Interpreters from Korea, please come in.
네. 네. 그 베트남에서 질문하신 내용을 저희가 간략하게 이해한 바로는 정부 자산에 공기업 자산이
Excuse me, I don't think we have the interpretation going on in this channel right now.
그러면
maybe
김우주 연구원님, 저희 연구원님한테 제가 말씀드리고 영어로 여기 저희 센터 연구원님이 말씀해 주시는 걸로 변경해 보겠습니다.
I think we have in-house interpreter sitting here, so maybe I can tell her my answer in Korean and she can interpret in a consecutive interpretation. Would that be okay?
Well, actually, we can hear you now, so I think we're good to go.
네네. 그 정부 자산의 공기업 자산 같은 게
So we are talking about a state-owned company asset, how they are recognized in the national accounting system. So the general accounting and the fund is included in the national accounting system, and the public or the state-owned companies are not included or are not subject to national accounting. And also when it comes to revaluation of rents, what's the cycle of revaluation? And based on the change cycle of the land value, we just set the revaluation cycle. So MOEF, the division actually sets the revaluation cycle. And if we take a look at the change in published price, we just identified that there is 25% of increase in terms of land price in every 5 years. That's why we set our revaluation cycle into 5 years. However, within a 5 years revaluation cycle, if there is a dramatic change in land price over 30%, then we make a revaluation shorter than 5 years. And when it comes to the land, we make a revaluation on an annual basis for certain lands.
I see Vietnam wants to come in. Is that a follow-up question?
Okay. There are a few questions that I'm looking at. The first question, how are you able to reconcile the completeness of the government asset? For example, does your agency have correct count of asset under their custody? Yet to answer this question, in short, each ministry or the agency has managed their own the transactions. That means that as the transaction happens, for example, the acquisition and disposal transaction happens, they are going to encode their own data into the system, which is will be managed in the central database of dBrain Plus. And as for the second question, was there any need for a law and circular on the adoption of the system as well on the open data and data sharing? Yes, in Korea, there's a law which is called National Property Law. In that law, it mandates the data disclosure on the national property transactions. So there are certain levels of the information will be disclosed to the public, so they can be transparently, open to the public. Okay, let's go to the third question. How often is the updating of the asset data? To answer this question, it depends. But basically, the data is maintained in real time. So as the transaction of acquisition or disposal happens, the data is updated in real time by the asset manager of each institution from Ministry or National Property Agency, etc. Also, there's a question, regarding the dBrain Plus. Is it, developed by our institution internally, or did you use the external software, the firm? To answer this question, we are together, developing the dBrain Plus. So that means we are making a plan and the budgeting, and then we are going to hire the people from the external company, and then they are made the code or system, and in terms of the testing, we are conducting testing to accept to the final system. That's how we are doing as per the dBrain Plus development. Does that answer to you?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think a related question, which we hear often is there's a great deal of effort by countries to establish the initial asset registry and having it as comprehensive as possible. But then this information is not always maintained and updated. So I think that's where the question was coming from. And so my understanding from your presentation is you have two aspects. You have a kind of administrative legal compliance duty, so whereby all agencies have to update annually their data. Plus, this information is publicly disclosed. So this, I guess, that also creates incentives to comply. And maybe the third aspect, which I find quite interesting in your dBrain Plus presentation, is you interlink all these different information systems. So I suppose that also contributes to keeping the data up to date and granular. Right? So whenever through procurement a new asset is being procured, does this information then flow into your asset registry, or when it's disposed? So I mean that's a bit, I guess, where many of these questions come from, because it's not easy to maintain these asset registry. Thank you. Then I think we have quite a few questions also regarding the performance measurement of land and building. And I think that also goes back to an earlier question in terms of what KPIs do you use to measure the performance of assets? So we heard different aspects. There's the value, there's the revenue, there seems to be the level of service. So it would be interesting to hear from you what KPIs the government is actually using to measure asset management, and notably land and buildings. I don't know who wants to come in on that. Is it you, Mr. Nam, or Mr. Kang?
질문이 뭐지?
질문이 지금 저희 두 번째 거 질문. 다른 것도 물어보셨는데.
그러면 지금 정확한 질문에 대해서 제가 이해를.
I'm not sure whether I understood the question correctly. Is the question about the KPI performance indicator. And also there is a question in chat box about the comprehensive plan on an annual basis. So let me answer the performance indicator question first. So in the case of COP, we have made efforts to optimize the government property management, and we actually identified some indexes or indicators, and based on those key indexes, we measure our performance. Those indexes include the number of lease contracts and the amount of revenue from lease, as well as indemnity amount and the collection performance, particularly the collection performance on delinquent loans or payment. However, if there is a massive sale of a government property, then the quality of government property can decrease. So we do not have any key performance indicator in terms of a sale, the government property sales. And also there is a question raised in the chat box about the comprehensive government property management plan at COP level. Or maybe I can conclude my answer to the question related to key performance indicator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's also another question in the chat box regarding intangible assets. And so to what extent do you value and account for scientific research? And at what stage is it once a patent has been obtained or not? And also in terms of many projects, there are oftentimes land valuations or analysis. And I think this goes to a broader question: is the information you're generating is an asset itself? So how do you value informational assets, basically? Thank you.
네, 국가기팀 한소영입니다.
Yes, I'm Han So-young. The government carries out the projects, and they could be scientific projects, or the land and information acquired could be recognized as intangible assets. I think that was the question. And we have a regulation for recognizing intangible assets. So it's identical to the generally accepted accounting rules. So we look at the regulations for recognizing them. Development costs, even in the private sector, I don't think it will be reflected as an asset. So I don't think that's reflected as intangible asset. It has to be sellable. It has a marketable value. And then if those are recognized, then we would recognize it as intangible asset. When the patent is developed, it's not the revenue you can create because of the patent. You look at the cost, expenditures incurred in the developing the patent, and therefore the amount has to be quite small. The amount recognized has to be quite small. And I think the total percentage is about 1%. It's not too large. You see that Korea applies very strict rules for recognizing intangible assets. The second question has to do with infrastructure asset, land included. And I think I said this in my presentations about how we manage the detailed subcategories. The SOCs has 8 subcategories, including roads and railroads and others. And we have also the 4 subcategories, such as land and structures and so on. We need land before the road to be operated. That's our perception. And therefore, when it comes to the roads, we included the roads and the land underneath it in our valuation. And I talked about it in the total amount. The land price is, of course, reflected.
Thank you very much. There's another question from Vietnam, actually too, but that's something we've seen in many countries, is when you move towards accrual accounting, the main challenge is the opening balance of your financial statements. And when there's not yet a comprehensive asset registry and up-to-date valuation of these assets, That's really something that takes time, and so therefore the opening balance will change from year to year. So how did you deal with that? And the second question is, how do you deal with information on infrastructure? Understand it's both an accounting data, but also financial statistical data, right? In the financial statements. So if my understanding is correct, is you cover both accounting data and statistical data. I think there's a related question also. What happens when infrastructure is delegated to a state-owned enterprise? So the ownership is not transferred, it's just delegated. So how do you report this data in the financial statements?
드리도록 하겠습니다.
Let me answer
답변 드리도록 하겠습니다.
the questions. The last part of the question is how the infrastructure assets are treated when they are commissioned to state-owned companies for operation. I can answer that in two ways. The first one is the ownership, whether the state has the ownership of infrastructure. For example, Korea Express Corporation builds and manages expressways in Korea. And the Korean government has established a law to give the management right or administrative right to the Express Corporation. However, the control power or the ownership lies in the Korean government. So we comply with the relevant laws and regulations, particularly when it comes to the electrical supplies. At KEPCO, Korea Electronic the corporation has the total control and ownership of the electrical supplies. So if you take a look at the relevant laws and regulations, and when the ownership of certain social infrastructure belongs to the government, then they are reflected and updated on the national accounting. However, if the ownership doesn't belong to the Korean government, then the related infrastructure asset is not reflected on the national accounting. And I'd like to answer the previous two questions as well. Let me answer them right now. The first question is the opening balance. How difficult it was to create an opening balance, and if there is some other assets occur over the years, how the new assets are reflected on the national accounting system. That is an obstacle that we have faced when we dealt with the accrual accounting. We had a pilot period for 2 years, and also we had a large scale the government property survey for 2 years. And after conducting the 2-year survey of government property, then we just came up with the opening balance. And also we conducted the pilot project for 2 years. And over the course of the project, we just encountered with some unexpected or unidentified government properties. So the advice that I can give to you is that you should be very cautious and careful when you move to the accrual accounting. So you need to make a thorough survey of the government properties in order to migrate to the accrual accounting. And most of the administrative right related assets of the government properties are fully reflected on the government accounting or the central government accounting. But when it comes to the social infrastructure, actually the social infrastructure were not subject to the national central accounting for the past 30 years. So the management status was reported to the government without reflecting them on the national accounting for the past 30 years. So there was a big challenge or the obstacle ahead of us. So as I mentioned before, it took 2 years for us to conduct a survey of the government properties in a comprehensive way. So we just joined our forces with the accounting related ministries, and we just came up with a relevant survey, and also we came up with the standards for the fair value based revaluation standards. So if there is a fair value available, then we just use it for revaluation. However, if there is no fair value available, then we just come up with alternative things such as the maintenance, replaced infrastructure expenditure, and so on.
No, thank you very much for this answer. And indeed, that's the challenge in many countries. So I guess it takes also a good communication and change management plan of why the opening balance may not be reflecting the full value, but really starting. That's great. Maybe two more questions. I'm conscious of the time. Unfortunately, time flies when we have such rich exchanges and presentations. But maybe two more questions which I have in the chat box. One which is straightforward from the Philippines is basically asking whether the government has a cadre of appraisers. So who is doing this appraising? Or do you also commission private appraisers, private companies? So that's one question. And the second question from Malaysia touches upon disaster risk. So do you insure your assets? And so what's the process in terms of insuring assets against natural disasters or riots? And so the valuation and the premium. And how do you deal with idle assets? We saw that one of your policy objectives was the optimization of asset usage. And so what's being done about idle assets? And if I may just add one question on the climate risks, maybe to Mr. Nam, the question is, how do you interlink your asset database with the Korean disaster risk management database and system to basically inform the risks and resilience to disasters, but also conversely trying to estimate the fiscal cost and risks of national disasters. So I think this, I don't know who wants to go first with these questions. So the question on disaster risk was from Indonesia. Thank you very much. And I think we need to stop the questions here. But maybe also to inform the participants that there will be a knowledge brief that will try to bring all this together so that we can have further exchanges. Thank you very much. So who wants to respond to the appraiser? So appraiser, disaster risk, costing and insurance, and usage of idle assets.
야, 그냥 답변 해버리겠다. 우리 해당되는 거. 네, 한국자산관리공사입니다. 캠코입니다.
I am representing ChemCo. Now, going to your questions, when it comes to the riots and disasters, are we insured? Have we insured our assets against those risks? On riot, honestly, I don't think we have ever insured for the fire and the building collapse and related accidents. So these are disasters, natural disasters, or something of it, something risk associated with collapse of the structures and so on. We are insured. We have insured our assets. And for the idle assets, how we manage our idle assets, that I would like to respond to that question. When it comes to the Korean government and the ChemCo, we do a on-site search, on-site due diligence, to identify if we have idle assets. And then after this on-site the surveillance, we explore and identify the idle assets. And afterwards, what we do is that the government finds it absolutely necessary that we change the usage plan for that asset so that this asset can be converted into something that can be utilized by the people, by the public. So we lease those formerly idle assets, or we sell those assets, or we try to develop them on our own. There could be idle assets that are of a substantial size, and we may choose to combine them together with other assets so that we can develop it as part of a social infrastructure development plan. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Maybe just for the assessors and assessments, if someone else wants to come in on that. And then on Mr. Nam, maybe on the linkage between dBrain Plus and the Korean disaster risk management and the layering, so notably given the dynamic nature of climate change and the climate modules. So to what extent, maybe also a question to Kamko, to what extent to take into account exposure of your assets to climate risks, not just in terms of extreme weather events, storms, flooding, and so forth. I have seen in your presentation that you are tracking energy consumption of your assets, so that's great on the mitigation aspect. So I don't know.
왜 지금 한 거예요?
어떤 거요?
에너지 컨sumption, 에너지 사용량.
우리 그거 유유자산.
Okay, I'm ready to answer your question. Okay, initially, there is no linkage between the national registry institution between those system and the dBrain Plus. So actually, as the presenter from CAMCO explained, if the disaster recovery transaction happens, then it's a time for asset manager to encode those change data into the system. So as for the energy consumption, it is used for to identify idle property. So as you guess, there's no the changes in the energy consumption. It means that the property is not used for any purpose. So meaning to say, we can categorize it as idle asset. So it is for idle asset identification to use those information. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We'll take note of this very smart indicator, which serves two purposes, and maybe also in terms of energy efficiency later on. Great. So I think we have a last question, and so I know it's always difficult to bring these sessions to an end, but we were conscious of the time already given by our current speakers. So maybe a last question from Vietnam. Was actually three questions in one. So one is the first period of public asset management in Korea mentioned public land. I think this is something we discussed already, the sale of land. So this has to be responded to. Second question is, what's the relation between dBrain and the financial statement? And the third question was the evaluation of the value of public infrastructure assets. So how do you distinguish between the land value and the infrastructure asset value, and if it's accounted separately? So I guess it's just a recap of the questions which were mentioned orally earlier, and as we had interpretation issues. So I don't know if there's any last word and response from any of our panelists before we hand over to Dr. Hill from the Secretariat for her closing remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for participating in the PEMNA TCOP webinar. Thanks to your fruitful, constructive, and open exchanges, I believe today's webinar was quite meaningful to all the participants. With the theme of Korea's public asset management, we had a quite extensive knowledge exchange during the webinar. Lots of questions and discussions. As many of you might remember, today's webinar was kind of in-depth follow-up from the last year's TCOP webinar on the fixed asset management, valuation, and registries. Fixed asset management has been challenging in many aspects, including valuation, accrual-based accounting, and FMIS. Korean experience presented today showed how Korea is managing public assets in terms of legislation, institutional arrangements, measuring and valuation, accounting, and FMIS. Those presentations were very informative and helpful understanding the asset management system of Korea. And I hope the knowledge exchange and discussions throughout today's PEMNA TCOP webinar could be very insightful to your everyday work situations. As we wrap up our meeting, I would like to express a few words of gratitude to those who made this meeting possible. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Philly Sissoko, Governance Manager of World Bank, for the excellent opening remarks. And I am very grateful to Ms. Fabian Sidero, PEMNA TCOP Facilitator, for all his efforts on organizing and facilitating this meeting. Also, I really appreciate Korean Ministry of Economy and Finance for your amazing efforts on organizing this TCOP webinar today. Our special thanks go to all the presenters, Mr. Ho Chil-kang, Ms. So-young-han, and Mr. Sang-wook Nam, for sharing your knowledge and experiences in Korea's public asset management. Finally, I would like to thank delegates from the PEMNA TCOP member countries and the colleagues from the PEMPAL network, CAMCO, KIPF, KPFIS, USOTA, and Treasury of Russia for your active participation and rich discussions. Without the help of those people, this meeting would have been very different. Let me conclude by thanking all of you once again for your time and valuable insights. I look forward to meeting you again at the next PEMNA meeting. Thank you.